All right, guys. I ended my live stream last night to finally get through Glory Road. I read like the last third of it in a single sitting. It probably should have happened a long time ago because I've been really enjoying this book ever since I picked it up. Right, it's something I picked up off the shelf, and I'm just like, oh, Heinlein. Love Starship Troopers. One of the best books I've read recently, so it's time to pick up something else. The last book I read from him, like Stranger in a Strange Land, was complete and utter garbage. And I think really encapsulates everything wrong with like Robert Heinlein as a creator. If you're not aware, it's bad. Okay, like uh, if you're not aware, like Heinlein has very Ricada-ish views on sex and sexuality. Like, oh, why shouldn't you like free love, man? And I'm like, that's basically what Stranger in a Strangeland is like free love, '60s hippie propaganda. Downright disgusting, ridiculous. Encapsulates everything wrong with him, and that's it's kind of an interesting like case study, going back to this guy's like bibliography and kind of like seeing how his genuinely base takes get mired by his absolute like nonsensical views on sex and women, and that's been like that was a reoccurring problem with like Starship Troopers as well. I got into like a Twitter discussion with people about this. Like, oh man, like women are better pilots than men. Like, no, they're not. And like obviously so, but it's an idea he was like fixated on and tried to like emphasize in like five novels. It's like it's embarrassing looking back on it. How hard people have been like trying to make the military woman a thing. But real talk, like generally those books are based. Starship Troopers, fantastic book in general, right? There are like iffy things you can like complain about it, but overall, I really enjoyed it and kind of look at it as like a really great example as to like how good science fiction used to be, right? And in that regard, like Stranger in a Strange Land is like kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like just complete garbage. So, like, where does Glory Road fit on this? Well, obviously, I did really enjoy this, like from start to finish. Like, I was never bored reading this book, but there were definitely like this feeling reading this, right, where like seeing the setup, seeing the conclusion, right, the pacing, right, it really feels as if Heinlein wanted to like exposit endlessly about the relationship problems because it's really interesting like reading the back of the book, looking back on like the book's most iconic like sequences. It's about the adventure, right? The idea is that like, oh yeah, an ordinary guy is pulled into this situation where he has to adventure and like fight for some woman, right? Universally appealing concept, right? Super Mario Bros, like Lord of the Rings, like it's very like archetypal fantasy stuff. And by the way, like I don't consider this sci-fi. By the way, I keep seeing people insist it is. It is not. It is like clearly genre fantasy. So like very much like Star Wars in that respect. But like not that that's a bad thing, because I love fantasy, but pure fantasy considering the setup and just all that results in. So like again, it's about the adventure, right? The idea is that like this guy ends up in this situation where it's like, oh yeah, it's time to go on this crazy adventure, and then he just goes and does it, right? So like that's what you would think the book would be about, espousing on like the political situation, the world, like the rules of the universes, right? The status, but like no, like the novel is actually about the relationship between the damsel in distress and the hero. So like you have like what? Like the last like 100 pages of this, ba- 80 actually like yeah about 80 pages of this base of this 300-page book are based like take place like after everything is already resolved, like there's a pretty lengthy setup too before they even start questing. So like again, there's very little actual questing in this. Like that's the weird thing about this, is that like the novel is like mostly like these three people, right, going questing, and they're very vague about like what's actually happening, what it actually means, and like what this is all about, right? And on one hand, that's what makes it so grand. That's what makes it so interesting. That's what makes it so spectacular, is this like this crazy situation that's thrust in front of you, and then you just kind of like rise up and just deal with it like an absolute unit, right? That interested me. You know, the idea of it interested me. Like there were just so many like, the build up to it was so good, and you get to it, and it's not super in focus. Like it's not really emphasized very well, like the danger the characters are in, or like how things are going to work out. Like if anything, you read this, and you just instantly just assume that things are gonna work out. Like you're gonna get the thingamajig, the egg of the phoenix. You're gonna get this thing that we don't know what it is or what it does, until later. It's just like the entire thing is about the hero and this chick, and there's like this third wheel there too, who the novel desperately wants us to think is important and just isn't. Like it's basically this like alpha female, like Amazonian, just like queen, getting like dominated by this rando from America. It's like it's so undeniably based that it's really difficult, like at a conceptual level, that it's really difficult to wrap your mind around, right? Like it sounds awesome, and it is in a lot of ways. But you also have like the core problem with this, like I think, is like the relatively like weak last third of the novel, in which they all win, they all like they get the you know they just basically just it's all resolved, and then like the hero, who has like spent like the past like the entire quest, like gaining new skills and proving himself and like doing things over and over again, overcoming all these trials. Like, oh no, I'm bored and now I'm having domestic issues with my wife. Yeah, he married her during the quest. It's like, okay, like the idea is that like, oh man, you don't belong here, bro. But like, get used to it, become acclimated, like, oh, I'm bored, there's nothing for a hero to do, bro. You wait for something else to happen. That's all you have to do. Like all this coping about like, oh man, I'm so bored, there's nothing going around, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, bro, wait for something to happen. Get a hobby, like learn something. Like, what are you doing? Like again, it's like it's trying to make a point about like the book wants to make this point about the hero and like the circumstances he's in, right? They want like the book wants you to think that like, you know, that now that the quest is over, that like things will just like fall apart naturally, right? Like it's like, so there's no like growth or evolution or just kind of like treating each other like actual people. It's like, oh man, things have to fall apart because they just do. Okay, it's like it doesn't really expound on why that is. Like again, like it's 80 pages of just nothing but just coping and seething and like just doing absolutely nothing. And it's just like it's such like it's not really a slog because like you like the characters and you kind of want to see like things wind down and stuff like that. Like I said, I enjoyed these 80 pages, but when you get to like how all of this like ties together, it does kind of feel as if like the core messaging is at the message of the book that they're going like the author is going for is at odds with what actually happens. Because this is exactly what the protagonist wanted. This is exactly what he got, and he was rewarded for it. And then it was time to think about the next thing. It was time to move on. Just sitting around being bored because, like, oh, I don't belong. Like, it's like, come on, figure this out, bro. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, to me, and I do feel this really strongly, like, I feel as if Heinlein has this issue with, like, like, writing people in committed relationships because like this was kind of a problem with Starship Troopers too, where they're just like the idea is that like, oh, you only interact with each other for sex and then you get bored of each other and then you move on. Like Heinlein was a degenerate, okay? Like advocate for like the free love movement, man, and it really does shine through in his work, and it really does result in showing the dysfunctional nature of these kind of relationships. Because the thing about this book is that it does desperately try to normalize polygamy to the point where like you they straight up like try and say Earth is unusual in that regard. It's like, come on. Like, really? Like, who are you trying to fool? This is clearly like his fetish, man. Like, oh man, this guy's wife offered herself to me, and ooh, she brought her daughters too. Ooh, one of them is 13 years old. Not exaggerating, by the way. It's like, come on. Like, really? Like, what about the actual questing? What about what you're actually doing? What about what you're actually up against? Like, what about it means? Like, it's crazy that you don't really see the antagonists at all. They just kind of exist in the background, like, ooh, we took this thing and we did this, and like, it's like, who are they? What were they trying to accomplish? Are they going to do it again? Are there others like them? There's all this talk near the end, like, oh man, she's going to get assassinated someday, and just like, doesn't happen. Like, again, like, the novel's core mistake, I think, and this is like the issue with it, is that like the adventure doesn't really end until you die. Okay, until like it ends in tragedy and like something happens that you can't like deal with or something. Like this idea that like he's just sitting around a palace like bored is just ludicrous to me. It's like, come on. Like it's just like I have a big problem with that. I don't like that at all. I think it's just I just think it's patently absurd and just is completely diminishes, you know, all of like the very genuine and real things that the hero has done. And like all the really interesting concepts that they bring up in this one, like they what I he brings up in this one. What am I talking? Like I've been watching so many games and play. Okay, watching so many shows. Like okay, so like what he brings up in this book is, he has all these interesting ideas like, oh yeah, there are multiple different universes, they all have their own different rules and they work differently, different elements, different materials, different animals, different cultures, like there's all this like build up to like this crazy like universal spanning adventure, and then you see very very little of it. It's like it's unbelievable. But like it works in this way where it's like kind of a less is more approach, where like you don't necessarily know what's coming next, and it just kind of like blends together very well. It's fantastic. Like it does really work. So like I've been emphasizing a lot about like how upset I was at the ending, and I do think like a major part of that is because like um of how this was set up. This idea that like of how much like this was so this felt like it was supposed to be some like grand epic adventure and then just doesn't really hmm like for me like the romance angle, right? Clearly, obviously reading the book going into it, it's like it clearly wants you to think that the male and female leads are like perfect for each other. And then like towards the end it tries like, reality ensues and then they start having like stupid fights and stuff like that. And it's like, come on. Like it just doesn't like it doesn't work well at all. It just feels as if like it was just there to kind of justify like critiquing like married life and like monogamy and things like that. Like that's kind of like my view on like why these decisions were made. Like it feels as if like the fantasy aspect was handled very, 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 very well. But then like when it was time to handle like more realistic aspects, like it just completely falls flat on its face because the book wants you to think that nothing happens after the story is over. It's just like come on. Okay. So, yeah, I know I've been griping about this a lot. But all in all, like I do really like it. Like I did really like this a lot. But my core problem with it, like it is a very big problem, is that like why exactly were if you're going to spend so much time like building up the romance and the interactions between the two characters, like why exactly are you going to try and like split them up under the most contrived circumstances at the end, right? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't lead to anything like impactful and meaningful. It's not realistic. It's just unbearably just obnoxious. I did not care for that at all. It for me personally, I I would have wanted more like adventuring stuff. I would have liked more implications that there were more things going on behind the scenes. Like I just can't accept that on this scale, like multi-universal like, nonsense that like this is like the last time that anything will happen ever. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And like when you take that into consideration that like something is going to happen eventually, like the entire core concept that like, oh no, ooh, like there's nothing for you to do here, ooh, your task is done. It doesn't make any sense because there's always going to be something that happens in the future. You need to understand that even if it's not happening now, you need to prepare for it in the future. You're not a hero anymore. You're a retired hero, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be like say training the next generation. That's actually a really good point actually. There's no discussion at all about training the next generation of heroes. There's this bit like in it where like he's talking to some kid and he like gives some speech about how like great he's gonna be when he grows up or something, and like Star says she's like super super moved by it or whatever. But like you don't really see those ideas being put into practice. You don't really see people like you don't really see like them like building up to something or improving things at all. It almost feels honestly like you were finding this thing just so this like woman can keep her like status and her power in this imperium. Like it's like okay. Okay, buddy. And that's like probably the point, like this idea that like he was used, bro, but I don't really buy that, like this idea that like yeah, you use people, like like he used her, for the mutual benefit of both of them, the idea of being used, the idea of being controlled, it's not like altogether an inherently terrible thing. When especially when you don't know what you're doing, like you need advice, you need structure, you need teachers, you need like people who actually care about what's going on. And like for Glory Road, it really oddly feels as if like it doesn't want to address like the ramifications of what happened. Like it really doesn't want to acknowledge that all you have to do is just wait for the next major thing to happen. It just really wants you to think that like that at the end of the adventure nothing is waiting for you. It's just that's just a gigantic cope from someone who has never really accomplished anything in his life. I feel like this is just something that Heinlein came up with. Like I've heard like it described that like Heinlein has like two good ideas and like 10,000 bad ones, and I do think that's kind of like my thinking, like reading this, because like yeah, there are lots of good things about the novel, but at the same time, should we ignore all of the very real issues when it comes to the world building, the characters, when it comes to like, the core conflict at the end, how it's resolved, like the simple fact of the matter is like it doesn't feel as if like the story should have ended this way. Like it doesn't feel as if like there was any honor or joy in it. It's like it's just in a lot of ways like completely out of touch with human nature. I feel, and I think that's a very severe problem that a lot of science fiction writers have, where they're more concerned about the idea of something as opposed to like how it would actually be utilized in real life. And in a lot of ways, like fantasy writers are a lot better at establishing how people would actually act in outlandish situations. But with a lot of sci-fi people, they tend to let like their ideas carry them away into like this realm of like crazy fantasy. So for Heinlein, considering like it's some having his protagonist consider like taking home a furry and fucking her, while his wife watches, this all happens. Like that's something he seriously put in there. That's something he really thought would be interesting, that would appeal to people. And like, meanwhile, I'm just sitting here just cringing, like, oh no, he's a furry, like, just unbelievable, just trash. Like what was the point of it? What did it build up to? What did it mean? Like it doesn't mean anything. Like it was in there because he was a sexual degenerate and he wanted to normalize sexual degeneracy. Like that's kind of my mentality on that. It doesn't mean anything for the plot, the world, the characters, the setting, like the story. It's just something there because Heinlein didn't get enough pussy growing up. That's my mindset on this. That's my mindset on like why Stranger of a Strange Land happened and the '60s in general. Like those guys just weren't getting enough pussy and were doing everything they could to communize like the product. like like it's a commune, bro. Like communism, but for sex. Like it's like come on. Like you really have to like show some restraint with shit like that. It's just like nobody wants to read about your shitty fetish, and that's like a real thing, a real issue I have with like Heinlein, especially having like tried to read Stranger in a Strange Land. I could not finish it. So like, so with all that being said, is the book good? Yeah. Like, yeah, there are like things you can be iffy on. There's things you can complain about. You can complain about like the pacing and the relationship and stuff like that. But I think all in all, like it's all at its core, it's just good fun. Like at its core, like it really does a really good job like coming up with a relatively unique scenario, coming up with a fun character dynamics, coming up with like reasonably good action sequences and a reasonably good like um ending. It's just at the same time like you read something like this and you really do feel like it could have been a lot more. And I suppose that's kind of how I felt about Starship Troopers as well, because that one kind of ends kind of suddenly too, because it's a random soldier fighting alien bug wars that doesn't really begin or end with him. So, but again, that's kind of why I like it though. That's kind of like my perspective on it, is that like it does leave you wanting more, and I think that's what makes it such compelling fantasy.